Hey, welcome or welcome back to the stash. In the year of our Lord 2024, good Spider-Man comics are basically a rarity, a treat that you must search deep for over the countless issues that will be forgotten within a day of its release. ASM has just proved to be nothing but an embarrassing excuse of a comic book which is just slowly forming into many stacks of back issues never to be read nor owned. But then, out of nowhere, Marvel announced a brand new limited series releasing in April called Spider-Man Shadow of the Green Goblin. Its whole thing was that it was like reading a Silver Age classic. It was evident in the marketing, but also with the traditional box in the top left corner. This was enough to get me interested in the title. However, when they announced that one of my favourite Spider-Man writers of all time, JMD Mateus, was returning to do the series, it turned from a, yeah, I might check it out, to me calling up the comic store and asking to pre-order it. In terms of making this video, yes, I am a little late to the party. At first, I just wanted to make sure that every issue was out so I could do one big video on it all, but then things just sorta got in the way. But I am happy to finally be taking a proper look at what I consider to easily be one of the greatest Spidey comics of 2024. So join us today as we go over Spider-Man Shadow of the Green Goblin. You've probably heard the story, right? About the boy who lost both his parents at a tragically young age, and the aunt and uncle who had to step in to raise him. Perhaps they couldn't heal all his wounds, wash away the stain of grief, but they loved him with all their hearts. And he loved them in return. The boy was bright, but awkward, an oddball, an outcast. But then, along came a radioactive spider, and everything changed. He gained extraordinary abilities, with an extraordinary ego to match. Can you blame him? The media dubbed him the Amazing Spider-Man. The outcast had become a star. But the star dimmed quickly when tragedy struck again. The boy's beloved uncle was murdered by a thug he could have, should have, stopped days earlier. And now that familiar grief was joined by a crushing guilt. He didn't feel amazing. He felt ashamed, and he vowed to do everything he could to make sure no one else's uncle would die on his watch, to use his power carefully, responsibly, to be a hero. But what does a 15-year-old kid know about heroism? Only what he's read in books, seen in movies, on TV. In other words, nothing. My name is Peter Parker. The story I'm about to tell you took place a long time ago, less than a month after my Uncle Ben's death. I've pieced it together from my own memories, first-hand accounts from some of the others involved, news reports, and yes, unsubstantiated rumors. Now, it may not be 100% accurate, but that doesn't mean it isn't true. Our story begins with an unnerving dinner party between Nels Van Adder and mannequins, each one playing a vital role, each one imitating a loved one he so desperately misses. He tries to live this illusion he's built, but he knows it isn't real. He knows he can never go back to his real family, all thanks to Norman Osborn. You see, he was originally Norman Osborn's research assistant, but if anything, he was more of his own personal guinea pig. This was still months before a maniac named the Green Goblin would terrorize Spider-Man's life, so think of Van as more of the proto-Goblin. He was tested on with the new formula Osborn was working on, which would eventually become the Goblin formula we all know about. Norman, of course, lied and claimed he knew nothing about the unexpected transformation that Nels was subjected to and blamed it all on his business partner Mendel Strom. Soon after what happened, the police believed that Van Adder drowned, but no body was found, and in a way, I guess he did drown. The man he was, the ordinary life he treasured, had been washed away forever. A broken monster, once a man, sits crying surrounded by the many crushed pieces of the mannequins he destroyed. As he observes what he's done, a mysterious voice speaks out to him, but we cut away before we can see who it is to a certain home in Forest Hills. Peter and Aunt May share breakfast together, but like most days since Uncle Ben was killed, there's this tension in the air. Sure, on the outside they pretend to each other that everything's fine, that they're fine, but deep down, on the inside, they're broken. It was a cycle. May would talk about everything except Ben to Peter. He'd respond with a joke, and May would pretend to be amused. Both in their own ways just trying to protect each other. Or maybe they were just trying to protect themselves. Later on, Spider-Man goes to his agent. He needs money badly to help May out with the bills. At first, he's against even being his agent anymore after the latest editions of the Daily Bugle have been dragging his name through the mud. But after pleading and begging, Maxie promises to find him something. Afterwards, Spider-Man swings around the city when he suddenly hears a call for help. a classic purse snatcher. He takes notice of the woman in peril. She's no less than Aunt May's age, and this thug just thinks he can take her valuable possessions just like that. To make the webhead even more angry, he pulls a gun on him, just like the heartless piece of garbage who shot Uncle Ben. Spider-Man swats the gun out of his hand and holds him up by his shirt. He's ready to unleash his power upon this lowlife, and deep down, he wants to, but he stops himself. For only a few days ago, he put a kid in the hospital with a single punch. He could have killed him. Or worse, he could have become just like that man who took Uncle Ben. So he resists. He simply webs him up, leaving him for the police. It turns out that thug was an addict desperate for cash with an unloaded gun. Spider-Man ponders about what if he hadn't held back. He's still trying to figure out the limits of his newfound powers, and in ways, it just overwhelms him. The recent events make him question in his very own core. Is he a hero or is he a monster? We cut to Osborn's penthouse. This story takes place right before Gwen's mother's death. Harry tries to comfort Gwen. He reminisces about his own mother. Then Norman walks in. He sees Gwen's been crying and checks in on how she's doing. He lets her know that he's been regularly seeing George during this tough time. He tells her what he told her father. Anything they need. Anything at all. And he's there for them. Harry thanks his dad for doing something like that for his friend, but Norman coldly brushes his own son aside. He's visibly shaken up by it, and Gwen tries to apologize, but Harry ignores it and opts for something else. Even as Peter recounts his earliest memories of Norman, he can see right through the lies. He remembers all the pain and misery this man caused, how he made Harry's life a living hell, how he murdered the same young woman he pretended to comfort that day. Over the years, Peter has tried not to hate him, to forgive him. He makes up excuses for his actions, and sure, over time, he eventually did let go of the hate. But forgiveness? Not in this lifetime. Later on, we see a birthday party. I guess Maxie did keep his promise because it was something. $125 would sure go a long way in helping Aunt May with the bills. Soon as he swings in, Daryl's already giving him a hard time, calling him a phony and trying to disprove all the amazing things Spidey was displaying, whether it was suction cups, silly string, or even cardboard props. Finally, Spider-Man had enough. After everything Jameson puts him through, this is the last thing he needs. The mother quickly rushes over and explains. She assures him that Daryl is a good kid, but his dad suddenly passed away a couple months back. Ever since, he's either been withdrawn or acting out. Spider-Man realizes the error in his ways. This mother was just trying to help her boy. She thought maybe a visit from Spider-Man would snap him out of it, but all he did was just throw a tantrum worse than his. He knew he had to find a way to make amends. After all, they were pretty much the same. Just a couple of kids trying to cope with a terrible loss. Spider-Man still keeps in touch with him to this day. He sends a birthday card every year. He's actually a doctor now. Maybe it's all thanks to Spidey. Maybe that's what he really needed. But one thing's for certain. They both helped each other out that day more than either could have imagined. After swinging around the city, Spidey takes Daryl back to the party. His mother offers the cash for the payment, but Spider-Man refuses it. He tells her to put it to good use and swings off. Meanwhile, Harry and Gwen arrive at a party hosted by some guys Harry used to go to school with. Gwen points out that he hated that place. He even begged his dad to be taken out of it. But Harry dismisses everything and just asks if they can just try to relax and enjoy themselves for a bit. But it was true. Gwen was right. Harry did hate that school. He was bullied and beaten every day. Within a second, he's pulled away from Gwen to meet the old gang. Soon after, this guy starts to bother Gwen. She tells him she's not interested, but he persists. Gwen continues to stand her ground. Now he's getting fed up. He grabs her arm, but Gwen warns him that her dad's a police officer. But of course, it doesn't faze him. So using moves her dad taught her, she shoves him off, leaving him more than embarrassed. Gwen decides to stay. Maybe this night might actually be a bit of fun after all. But in typical comic book style, the proto-goblin comes crashing through, demanding for Harry Osborn. Everyone then begins to flee from the party, all filled with terror. Harry especially. I mean, what would a monster like that want him for? As he gets closer to the door, a giant red hand latches onto him and yanks him backwards. Just then, nearby, Spider-Man aimlessly swings around the city, doing anything to put off going home. He couldn't bear the thought of another night where him and May lie to each other. So it was actually relief when his spider sense started going crazy. Now, he didn't meet Gwen or Harry till college. That was true for Peter Parker. For Spider-Man, however, let's just say they had a minor run-in. He spots Proto-Goblin leaping rooftops with Harry held hostage and he wastes no time. Using his uncanny spider abilities, he swings in and lands a crushing kick to the Goblin's back, causing him to release Harry. The young Osborn falls off the roof and is sure to plummet to his death, but lucky for him, a web line shoots forward and without a second to spare, the amazing Spider-Man saves his life. Even after what just happened, Harry is terrified at the mere sight of Spider-Man. It's no mystery to what newspaper he's subscribed to. As the two go back and forth, the Proto-Goblin gets the jump on Spidey and hits him like he's never been hit before. And considering all the raw emotion, the unexpressed grief and rage he was sitting on, Spider-Man couldn't wait to hit him back. After throwing the hit, Spidey rushes over, fearing he lashed out once again without thinking. He asks the menacing foe if he's okay. He replies, he hasn't been okay in a very long time. He catches Spider-Man off guard once again, but this time he unleashes a series of deadly attacks. This results in Harry realizing that he might have been wrong about the wall crawler all along. After landing what is seemed to be a finishing blow, the Goblin rushes over to his target to continue his mission. Right before he's able to reach Harry, a web line pulls him back, causing him to fall over. Spider-Man offers him a chance to stop, to walk away. The Proto-Goblin would love to, but unfortunately for him he's lost way too much already, and this is the only way to get it back. The police arrive. The mere sight of them send the Goblin off running. Naturally, they try to find Spider-Man as well at the scene, but by the time they arrive, he's already far gone. Spider-Man deep down hates violence. It's just two people one punch away from dying. But you know what he doesn't hate? Do you know why he kept putting the mask on, swinging on webs all those years? Because Spider-Man could help people. Because he could make a difference in their lives. Sure, some of his methods when he was young had better alternatives, but when he looks back on that skinny, insecure kid from Queens and all that he accomplished, he's proud of him. Less could be said, however, for when Norman Osborn reaches the scene. At first, he shows real concern over his son, over Harry almost dying, but then that concern quickly turns into resentment. That's not all the Osborn problems, for it is revealed that the person who set this whole thing up, the person who promised to cure the Proto-Goblin upon the capture of Harry Osborn, is in fact his mother. Later that night, a bruised and battered Peter Parker lays on his bed trying to recover until he gets a knock on his door. He swiftly hides his costume and answers. Aunt May explains that she was too worried over him being out so late to get any sleep, but before she continues, she's horrified at the sight of her beaten nephew. She questions what happened to him, but Peter plays it off. No big deal, he says. No big deal? Her husband was killed. Her nephew, the boy she loves like a son, comes home half dead, looking like some hoodlum, and he has the audacity to tell her it's no big deal. She continues asking him how he could be so thoughtless, so irresponsible, so unbelievably cruel. My name is Peter Parker, and I want to tell you a story. The walking mound of beach was named Flint Marko, otherwise known as the Sandman, and his life had been pretty tough. One bad break after another. No excuse for wrecking that east side dive and sending the bartender to the hospital with cracked ribs and a shattered kneecap. But as someone who's been pushed to the edge and over it on multiple occasions, I can relate to his anger and frustration. But for all the years that have gone by since these events occurred, I can't muster the same empathy, the same compassion for Norman Osborn. I'd like to believe Norman was devastated after Nels Van Adder, the so-called Proto-Goblin, tried to kidnap Harry, that the very thought of losing his only son was unbearable. I'd like to believe he genuinely loved Harry, but Norman was a master manipulator, a pathological liar, and even if he was capable of feeling love, it was buried deep in a soul poisoned by trauma, locked away in the darkest corners of a demented mind. Love? For Norman, it was just another means to an end, another weapon in his hands. Am I doing Norman a disservice? Has the fact that he was Spider-Man's enemy for so long, that as the Green Goblin he left a trail of brutality and sorrow in his bloody wake, blinded me to his humanity? Perhaps, and you know what? I don't care. Emily Osborn, Norman Osborn's wife, Harry's mother. Everyone thought she was dead, but that was just what she wanted everyone to believe. Emily reassures the Proto-Goblin that bring Harry back to her and she'll provide him the cure, the ability to go back to his old life he so desperately misses. Suddenly, every muscle in his body begins to spasm, every cell is on fire, and he lets out a roar like none other. The formula is changing him again, bringing him one step closer to death. We then go back to Aunt May and Peter's home. The two still haven't made up from last night's arguments, but the pair long to reconcile. Peter knows it was his fault. He frightened her, hurt her, a woman that's been through so much. Through all this, he unleashed a raw anger he's never seen before. Peter knows he has to talk to May. He has to apologize, and deep down, he knew that Aunt May felt the same way. They needed each other more than ever. But the question is, why did they turn away? What were they so afraid of? We then cut to the hospital where Helen Stacy, Gwen's mother, is living out her last few days. Her prognosis was bleak. She didn't have much time left, but Gwen refused to see it. At the end, it was her way of coping. Maybe she could will her mother back to health. Sure, it was pretty much impossible, but it at least gave George Stacy, her dad, a little form of comfort. Meanwhile, in Brooklyn, the Sandman is preparing his getaway after robbing the bank. As he makes his way closer to the exit, the old trusty spider signal shines from high above. Flint grins. He was hoping for Spider-Man to show his face. He's still sore about how their first encounter went, with Spidey winning by using a vacuum. He plans to get his sweet revenge. Spidey's got to be extra careful. He still hasn't fully healed from the beating he took against the Proto-Goblin, and he swore to Aunt May he'd stay out of fights, especially with his fear of not knowing his own strength. He wonders what made him go out of his way to take on someone like Sandman on a day like that. Sure, he'd like to assume it was a heroic desire to see justice done, to put an escaped criminal back behind bars, but the truth is, being Spider-Man was an escape from high school and all the bullies, an escape from the shame he felt with the way he treated Aunt May, but most of all, an escape from the crushing guilt over Uncle Ben's death. The mask allowed him to still be Peter Parker, but a more dynamic version of himself, the more confident, less awkward Peter. As the fight continues, Sandman makes note of how nothing can hurt him. Granted, he is made of sand. This is just what Spidey needed to hear. He can finally shake off his own self-imposed restraints and let loose for once. The two go at it properly this time, exchanging massive blows until Spider-Man manages to gain the momentum. With it, he just unleashes hell upon Flint. Spider-Man hits him so fast, so hard, so unrelentingly, that all Marco could really do was try to hold himself together. Sandman deep down was scared of being humiliated again, of going back to jail, and this berserk attack from Spider-Man only made that fear push Flint to his own limits of his power. But the fight is interrupted as we switch scenes to see a cozy house. Inside, a mother and her two children are enjoying their dinner, unbeknown to them that their long-lost father is a lot closer than they'd ever expect. He watches from the window. His heart longs for the chance of opening that door, taking them in his arms and telling them all how much he's missed them, how much he loves them, how much he needs them. After Sandman and Spider-Man's big fight, the two call a short truce. They find a nice rooftop and just talk. I mean, when you're like them, who else is going to be able to relate to what you're going through? They converse about how incredibly difficult their lives have been ever since they become whatever it is they are. They accept that no matter how hard they try to be normal, it's just something they'll never fully be. Spidey suggests that maybe for Flint's case, it would be a little easier for him just to go straight. Flint admits that he's actually thought about doing it, yet he believes it's just too late for him to change. Marco gives Spidey his word that for tonight he won't cause any trouble, especially considering all the money is just gone. He proposes an offer. The two rest up and start over again tomorrow at noon. He continues, I mean sure, who knows what will happen, but for now, for just this night, let's forgive and forget. The two shake hands as Sandman slowly drifts away into the cool breeze of the night. Spider-Man in hindsight admits how much of a dumb choice it was to allow a wanted criminal to just leave like that, but at the time, he was just a kid. Plus, the Human Torch ended up capturing him the next day anyway. Later that night, Nels pays Norman a visit. He uses it to try to warn him he'll be back. Norman asks, why does he want Harry? Especially since it was he who made him the monster he is today. But Ada kept his cards close to his chest. Norman's security bursts through the door and unloads as many bullets as they possibly can. Nels falls to the ground seemingly dead, but much to their surprise, bullets have no effect on someone like him. Harry on the phone with Gwen is interrupted by the Goblin. Norman begs Nels not to hurt his son, but his prayers fall on deaf ears. Then soon after, Harry Osborn is finally about to meet his long-lost mother. At that moment all the way in Queens, Peter watches the late night news when suddenly a report breaks through detailing the current information about Harry Osborn's abduction. Peter doesn't waste a moment and runs out. Aunt May, ready to finally have the talk they so desperately needed to heal their broken hearts, is shocked to find Peter missing once again. I suppose I could have stayed, had that talk with May, and then gone looking for Harry. But my delay could have meant his life. I already had Uncle Ben's death weighing on my conscience, and I wasn't about to add another. No, family would have to wait till Spider-Man's work was done. It wasn't the first time, And I'm sorry to say, it wouldn't be the last. After hours of searching for Harry Osborn, Spider-Man finds nothing of use. Lucky for him, there's a good old-fashioned robbery to take his mind off his failure. He swiftly knocks out one of the thugs, causing the other to try his luck at shooting the wall crawler. Of course, not a single bullet hits Spidey, and he snatches the gun from out of the thug's hand. He surrenders and begs to be spared of any pain. This angers Spidey. He shouts pathetic as he smacks the thug across the room with the end of the gun. Yet in a way, it was almost like he wasn't talking to him. To Spider-Man, it felt like he was talking to the lowlife who took Ben away. Spidey then counts the whole night as a fail. Sure, he saved the man in the robbery, but he's no closer to finding Harry than he was a few hours ago. He arrives home. Aunt May is sitting there. She's been there the whole night, waiting for her nephew to return. He apologizes for being so late, says he lost track of studying, and in an attempt to go to a familiar safe place with Aunt May that he's so used to, he asks for some food. But she doesn't respond. She doesn't respond to anything he says. Aunt May gets up and coldly, quietly, leaves the room. Later in the hospital, Norman Osborn is still unconscious from his encounter with the Proto-Goblin. As we take a small peek into his mind, we see that this man is highly disturbed. In fact, it's these visions he sees which results in him jumping up wide awake, gripped by primal fear. He crawls out of the bed as the nurse arrives. The doctor's orders have him to be in bed at all time. As Captain Stacy and Osborn talk, Gwen starts to lose her composure and runs off. Her mother's in that same hospital slowly dying. Her best friend Harry has been kidnapped, and she finally falls apart. George goes after his daughter while Norman is left alone with his demons that relentlessly haunt him. We switch scenes to a cabin somewhere in the Hudson Valley. Harry's still unconscious. Emily battles an inner conflict about the whole situation. She's suddenly terrified for their reunion. She wants to tell him everything, but she's worried he won't understand. Emily frets if Norman poisoned his mind, just like how he did to her all those years ago. How he went from this open, vulnerable, charismatic man to the complete opposite. How they used to bond over the scars they formed during their traumatizing childhoods. How he used to become so agitated to the point he'd almost hit her, but then quickly fall to his knees begging for her to forgive him and stay. It just turned into this endless manipulative cycle. Even after Harry was born, Norman managed to become even worse a person, for he'd constantly belittle Emily and even her family, not deeming them worthy of the Osborn bloodline. The abuse went on day after day after day, and for a while, Emily having Harry was more than enough. But when Norman's emotional cruelty started to take on other forms, darker forms, she just couldn't bear it anymore. Emily begged Norman for a divorce, but he threatened to destroy her if she ever left. This left her no choice but to think of another plan born of desperation. Using Norman's wealth, she was able to fake her own death through a car accident. But through it all, she just wanted her son. The one thing she never wanted to leave behind. Nels makes his presence known. Emily assures him it's time to end Norman once and for all. After that, Ada can finally be the Proto-Goblin no more. As Niels leaps into the distance, it is finally time for Harry to wake up. But meanwhile, back at the hospital, Gwen Stacy sits beside her passing mother, pleading, begging, praying that she doesn't die. George tries to get her to face the harsh reality that her time on Earth may be over. Gwen lashes out with tears pouring down her face. George stands there silently. The two then hug and promise that whatever may come their way, the two will hold tight and face it together. For that's what families do. Later that night in Queens, Peter Parker sits outside his window, alone, staring into the night sky. But then Aunt May demands him to come back inside before he falls and hurts himself. Peter this time is fed up and immediately tells her to stop treating him like a child. However, he quickly changes his tone. He begins to apologize for what happened the other day and swears it'll never happen again. May asks what was he even thinking in the first place getting into a fight, but she's met with silence. May sighs and makes note of how different Peter's been lately. Pete responds with the fact that ever since Ben's gone, they've both changed. That ever since Ben's gone, they haven't even properly talked about it. They sit in silence once more before Aunt May asks Peter to come back inside. Once he climbs through the window, Aunt May begins to tell Peter that ever since she was a little girl, that when things would go wrong, she tries to be strong. Not for herself, but for the people she loves. She doesn't want to burden Peter with her grief, so she bottles it all up inside and tries her best to push through. Peter mentions that they'll never be able to push through anything if they don't talk about it, unless she... But May doesn't let him finish the sentence. She bursts out asking unless what? Unless she relives that horrible moment Uncle Ben died in her arms? Unless she starts to break down and cry like the weak, pathetic old woman she views herself as? Peter grabs May's hands and assures her that she's many things, but weak and pathetic? Never. To Peter, she's the strongest, most amazing person he's ever known. May, filled with grief, replies with, "Not like Ben Parker." She begins to say he was, and all Peter does is agree. The two turn towards the portrait of Pete and Ben from years ago and look on with saddened hearts. They miss him, of course they do, but they finally let down their wall. They finally share their grief, remembering their Ben Parker, helping each other move forward. Later on, the two are half asleep on the couch watching the late night news until a report about Harry's search captures Peter's attention, and in the blink of an eye, Spider-Man's on the prowl. At the hospital, the Proto-Goblin is there to finally finish the job, but when met face to face with the real monster, he freezes. He can't do it. Norman sits up and belittles Nels, calls him weak, but he underestimates how far a man will go when they're desperate. The Goblin grabs Norman's neck, revealing Emily is the one behind all of this, until Spider-Man swoops in and webs Ada away. But hearing Emily's name was like a knife plunged into Norman's heart, and just for a brief moment, all the posturing, all the arrogance was drained away, and the great Norman Osborn was reduced to a broken man. The Proto-Goblin, furious at Spider-Man for intervening, once again lunges at him, taking him to the streets of New York, slamming him into the pavement. Now, seeing Nell's body oozing, pulsing, transforming was strange enough, but things got considerably stranger, for when Spider-Man gets back up, a piercing call for help rings around his ears. Somehow, he's been thrown into the one moment he wishes he could go back and fix, the moment where his Uncle Ben was ruthlessly taken away from him. Spider-Man is horrified at the sight, for he is reliving the worst tragedy of his entire life. In that moment, there is no time for questions. He has to save Uncle Ben, but for some reason, no matter how much he struggles, no matter how desperate he is to intervene, he can't move at all. All he can do is just watch it happen. All over again. A broken Aunt May rises up and begins to blame everything on Spider-Man. She wants to see his face. She wants to look into the eyes of the man who's responsible for taking her love away. As she rips Spider-Man's mask off, she's terrified by the sight of her nephew under the costume. He tries to explain that he didn't know. He didn't mean for it to happen, but May doesn't want to hear any of it. She blames it all on him. For someone else may have pulled the trigger, but it was he who killed Ben. With every blow, each part of the illusion slowly broke away. For Peter's feelings may have been real, but this wasn't reality. The Proto-Goblin is confused as to why Spider-Man isn't fighting back, but then his worries go from bad to worse as his body goes into a degenerative metamorphosis state. And so as he reached each new state, it temporarily secreted a psychoactive alkaloid, hence the hallucinations Peter was facing. Nels, horrified at what he's becoming, leaps away. In hindsight, Peter only wishes he knew what he does now, for maybe he could have helped Van Ada, maybe he could have given him his family back, and maybe, just maybe, if he knew the truth about Norman, he could have stopped him then and there, and saved them all a lifetime of suffering. But at the same time, he acknowledges that it's easy to look back and say what you could have or should have done, but he's learned that regrets are useless and toxic. In the end, all we can try to do is learn from the past, from our mistakes, and try our best to move on. Now Peter knows that deep down he hasn't been able to move on, and he constantly lives with a lifetime of regrets, a mountain of guilt. But on his best days, he's made peace with it, something Norman never did. Speaking of Norman, back at the hospital, he's finally fed up of sitting around doing nothing, so he decides to leave. Sure, they try to stop him, but at the end of the day, his money built the entire place. In that same building, there's someone who, unlike Norman, wouldn't be walking out. Helen Stacy lays there as she awaits her fate. Gwen tries to comfort her dad, but they both know it's time. They have to allow themselves to feel. They have to allow themselves to grieve. Captain Stacy was a man who spent his entire career dealing with the darkest, ugliest aspects of the human nature, and he faced it all with bravery and compassion. But losing his wife to cancer simply broke him. Gwen watched him fall apart in front of her own eyes, and in a way, she fell with him. The two sit by Helen. Gwen pleads for her not to leave, but she's met with silence. The silence that fills the room, for the person they care about most has gone to a better place. Back at the cabin, Harry is finally awoken. Peter assumes that she must have told him everything about her and Norman, and the pain she felt having to leave her son. Anxiety fills her completely. She's worried about how he'll react, but Emily is instantly relieved when her son Harry embraces her return. But that joy is short-lived when a certain Norman Osborn enters the room. Spider-Man, going as fast as he can, manages to find the Proto-Goblin. The two continue their long and painful battle, but this time on a busy road. It results in a bus being knocked off course, with everyone inside heading for a certain demise. Peter, using his spider strength and agility, stops the bus from falling and saves everyone, and goes off to find the Goblin again before the police attempt to arrest him. Back in the cabin, tensions begin to rise as Norman not only begins to manipulate Harry in the way only he can, but also because he pulls a gun ready to kill his wife. But just like Nels from before, he stops himself. Norman drops the gun and tells Emily to leave and never come back. She tries to get Harry to follow, for the two of them can finally build a life together. But then Harry lashes out towards his mother and demands for her to leave. As Emily departs, Norman apologizes to Harry. Harry mistakenly accepts it, for he believes it's about what just happened. However, Norman was talking about this chemical he has to make him forget all the events that's just taken place recently involving his mother. As Emily is driving far away from the cabin, the Proto-Goblin causes her car to crash and drags her out of the vehicle. She's confused by the entire thing and tells him where Norman is to finish the job, but Nels is through being a puppet. He's no murderer. He orders for Emily to give him the antidote, but she can't. She can't because she lied. There was never a cure. It was all a play to get her son back. I guess in the end, Emily was truly an Osborn after all. Right before the Proto-Goblin can finish his threat, Spider-Man once again intervenes, but this time, instead of engaging with the fight, Van Atta runs away in fear, as his degenerative metamorphosis state slowly, ever so slowly, gets the better of him, until in some twisted way, he's finally at peace. The next day we see Harry and Gwen, Norman and George comfort each other with all the tragic events they've been through over the last few days. We then go back to Forest Hills at the home of May and Peter Parker. Even after all this time, it's still hard for me to wrap my head around the fact that May Parker is gone. But she's not really gone, is she? She's with me every day. Her voice, along with Uncle Ben's, encouraging me, guiding me. I wouldn't be the husband, the father, the man I am today if not for them. And I'll hold them in my heart. Forever. This series is truly something special. Granted, it is a little sad that our main source of good 616 Spider-Man stories have to come from flashbacks, but J.M. DeMatteis absolutely nailed it when it came to writing this series. Spider-Man comics for the longest of times have been missing this key element that used to make the book so special. Heart. This short comic series has heart. The three main stories within this book are also emotionally gripping and well written, that with basically each one I'm left with goosebumps by how good it is. Whether it was a depiction of Helen Stacy's passing, the effects Norman had on everyone in his family, or Peter's guilt about the death of Uncle Ben, and the way him and May finally learned to grieve together, it was also perfectly meshed into these 4 issues. I love that this series doesn't just deliver a compelling story, it also provides incredible character development and emotional investment. One aspect I love most here is that it's set during Spider-Man's first year after getting his powers at age 15, really able to experience his first year alongside him as he deals with grief, understanding his powers, and finding his purpose. And also, you don't just spend this time with Peter, you spend it with everyone else involved in the story, and because of this, my admiration for these characters and the comic grew with each issue, and the fact that at the end it's revealed that the Peter telling the story is married and a father was another great surprise. Now when it comes to the artist of this series, I'm a little conflicted, for there's plenty of moments where I think the artwork looks great and really adds to the scene, but other times I find the designs of the characters somewhat distracting. I don't know, maybe I'm just old-fashioned, but I really don't like the modern look for young Peter, or just Peter in general now. When he's got no features whatsoever of how he's supposed to look, it just feels wrong to me. Like there's certain distinctive aspects of his design that should stay throughout each, reimagining of the character, whether it's his eyebrows or the little fangs in his hair. It would just be nice to keep some sort of consistency like we used to have way back when. Because to me at least, from what it seems, over the years as movie synergy becomes bigger and bigger, he's just become so generic in nearly every aspect of his design. Also, for the last issue, I could have sworn Harry in some panels looked like James Franco and Norman looked like William Dafoe. Another very distracting thing for me again. But minus the designs, there was nothing else that I personally found negative with the art. That minor nitpick aside, I thought it was a real standout. Now to put it simply, no one does it like J.M. DeMatteis. This man has a serious gift when it comes to writing Spider-Man, and he once again proved that he's still in fact got it. I would honestly love for him to write the main books because his skills or the ASM title is so desperately missing. This is as good as Spidey gets. I adore this comic. It's tragic and emotional, with so many things and themes being explored. It captures what makes Spidey comics, or what made them, so special. And in a time where all modern books are filled with hate and disinterest towards good storytelling, a comic like this is what we truly needed. It makes you fall in love with Spider-Man books all over again. And because of everything I've said, it's simply why I love J.M. DeMatteis's Spider-Man: Shadow of the Green Goblin.